very warm welcome. I think I've been able to greet almost everyone, but if I haven't, I hope afterwards to do so. I want to thank you for coming out this evening and for your support of the Lay Center. I'm glad that it didn't snow and that everyone was able to get here today. We were a little bit worried about that, but we're glad that you made it. It really does mean so much to all of us at the Lay Center to know that this group of friends gathers each year in Washington. And so I really do bring greetings from each and every member of the Lay Center community, especially Riki von Velzen. And they all of the students at least, wish that they could be here with you this evening. And part of the reason is that it's exam week in Rome. And you'd rather be anywhere else than Rome during exam week. Before I introduce our topic and speaker for the second part of the evening, I'd like to just begin with a word of thanks to various people who have made this event possible. A special welcome and thanks goes to Father John Crossan. There he is. As many of you know, Father John Crossan is an oblate of St. Francis de Sales, and he is the Executive Director, the Secretariat for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And because of the work of the Lay Center in both ecumenical and interreligious dialogue, it's a particular joy that you're with us today. So thank you very much for presiding at the vespers and for being with us. I want to also thank Dr. Kathy Desjardins, the music director of Holy Trinity Parish, who not only played the organ so beautifully tonight, but who so generously planned with Father Crossan the evening prayer. And we're really grateful to this generous help that you give us every year, Kathy. Thank you. And also to our board member and cantor for the evening, Mike Schultz. And to our young friends from the Catholic Apostolate Center for their help with videoing this event this evening. This is the first time we've been able to do that through the younger generation's help. So thank you very much for that. We're very grateful to the Sisters of Georgetown Visitation for their generosity in allowing us to host this event each year in this really beautiful and special space. Today is the Feast of the Presentation, and it's a very special day for religious. And I just invite you to join me in thanking and recognizing these sisters, the ones who are here with us and the ones who are in the infirmary. And we're so grateful to you for your witness and to the Lord. And we pray that He will bless you with abundant joy and peace today and every single day. So thank you, sisters. It's a joy also to welcome Sylvia Mullins, who is with us. Sylvia is a doctoral candidate at Georgetown, and she lived at the Lay Center for 2 years while doing her research. And many of you would have had a chance to meet her during the reception, and she can give you the insider's view of the Lay Center. The Lay Center is a thriving community, a vibrant community of women and men from 14 countries. Catholic, Orthodox, Muslim, Jewish students have been part of our community over the last few years. Also, a few Buddhist monks have been thrown in as well. We're really very grateful for this opportunity to be involved in what I would call a dialogue of everyday life. And we're grateful to each of you for helping us to make this happen. Just a second. Those who work particularly hard to carry on the mission of the Lay Center are our board members and our honorary board members. And a special word of thanks goes to each and every one of them. I thank especially Nancy Lindsay, to Mary Juan and Sonia Vandama, who were instrumental in planning this evening. And also to all the other members of our board and our honorary board members who are here with us this evening. Really, we're so grateful to you for all that you do to make the Lay Center what it is. Now, when the topic for this evening's lecture was chosen last August, "You will be my witnesses following Jesus Christ in a world of conflict and suffering," little did we know that the precarious situation of Christians and other minorities in the world would escalate even more than we could imagine. You know, the situation seems to be getting worse every day. The courage of these Christians offers us an example of discernment, solidarity, and faithfulness. You know, some of these witnesses can really be quite close to us. I remember, for example, Father Rahid Ghani, a young Iraqi Chaldean priest who celebrated Mass in our little chapel dedicated to the Holy Trinity regularly at the Lay Center for a few years, from 2002 to 2003. Just before he finished his studies, we spoke about his imminent departure from Rome, and I can still see him standing in the garden together with me, and he told me he was going to go back home to Mosul. And I said, "Isn't that dangerous?" And he replied, "Yes, but what can I do? I'm a priest, and I want to go back and be with my people." He left Rome, and on June 3rd, 2007, just after celebrating Mass, he and some others were ambushed, and one of the gunmen shouted at Father Rahid that he had warned him to close the church and demanded to know why he didn't do it. And Father Rahid replied saying, "How can I close the house of God?" It's hard to believe that Mosul, that had once been the largest Christian community in Iraq, where Christianity had flourished for nearly 2,000 years, is now devoid of Christians. And this is just one of many examples of persecution. Rahid and so many others remind us about the cost of discipleship and also the responsibility that we have to be in solidarity with these Christians and to work towards peace. How do Rahid and so many others challenge us in our call to discipleship? How are we to live today in this world of conflict and suffering? This is the topic of this evening. I'm very grateful to Reverend Professor Lefebure, the Matteo Ricci Professor of Theology at Georgetown University and a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago, who has so graciously agreed to give this lecture. He's authored numerous books, including most recently, True and Holy, Christian Scripture and Other Religions. He also co-authored The Path of Wisdom, a Christian commentary on the Dhammapada, which received the 2011 Frederick J. Streng Book of the Year Award from the Society for Buddhist and Christian Studies. Please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you this evening. From biblical times to the present, Jews and Christians have been called to be witnesses, often in situations that expose them to danger. According to the Acts of the Apostles, at the moment right before his ascension into heaven, Jesus challenged his followers, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." Now, Jesus did not promise his followers that they would always be successful witnesses. Instead, he promised them opposition, hardship, mistreatment, false accusations, and even death. But he promised that the Holy Spirit would be with them through it all. The Greek word for witness is martyr, the root of our English word martyr. In contemporary English, the word martyr often carries negative connotations, suggesting a person is drawing attention to his or her own sufferings and seeking sympathy. The original meaning of the word martyr is just the opposite. A true witness, a genuine martyr, points not to her or his own sufferings, but to the saving grace of God, even in the most difficult of situations. We often think of the early church as a time of martyrdom, and many Christians did indeed bear witness to the gospel at the risk of their lives. One of the great virtues of the martyr is parousia, the virtue of bold speech, free from fear of what others may think. But our own times, the 20th and 21st centuries, are also times of widespread martyrdom, where Christians in many parts of the world are called to bear witness to the gospel at severe personal risk of hardship. So I've been asked to speak tonight about Christian witnesses in contexts where this is difficult, even dangerous. And so this will be a rather somber talk reflecting the gravity of the current situation. The news reports of the present times are often terribly discouraging. In one setting after another around the world, there are conflicts leading to discrimination, persecution, and violence. Often religious minorities are among the most vulnerable. It's a variety of reasons why Christian witness can be difficult in a particular situation. Direct government interference, pervasive corruption, militant movements that target Christians or others, interreligious animosity, tensions among different Christian communities, poverty, and social discrimination, including mistreatment of women. In the limited time available, I can do more than evoke a few examples with no pretense of being complete. I'll start in China. Perhaps the most dramatic example of direct government interference in the life of the church today is China. In recent years, I've been visiting scholar at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and at Fudan University in Shanghai, and I've lectured at Minzu University of China in Beijing and at Shanghai University. So my comments are shaped by these experiences. A recent headline from Catholic News Asia proclaims, 2014 saw worst persecution of Chinese Christians in a generation. And it's true. From many reports, government officials in many areas of China have removed crosses, disrupted Christian activities. A large church in Xinjiang was destroyed. In some areas, Christians who are not in government-approved organizations face difficulties, including Catholics in the underground church who face harassment and long-term imprisonment. Just in this morning's news, there's an item, Bishop Cosmos Shi and Xian of Yixian died at the age of 94 after 14 years in prison. He's one of the long-suffering members of the underground church in China. There's one other Bishop James Su Jimin of Baoding, who's also still in prison since October 1997. So there's many people in China have borne courageous witness. The situation in China is complex and shifting, and the Chinese government is not consistent from what I am told. So what I've heard in my time, both in mainland China and in Hong Kong and Macau, is no general statements will be accurate. A lot depends on the local Chinese officials, and it also depends on the people in the various Catholic communities in China. You're probably aware there's the so-called open church or official church or Catholic Patriotic Association, which has government sponsorship and more or less control depending on where you are. And then there's the underground church, which in some areas is persecuted, in other areas not so much. In some areas, these communities get along with each other. In other areas, they will not speak to each other. I met a Korean Jesuit in Macau who works up near the border of North Korea in China. And he can talk to both sides, to the underground Catholics and the open church Catholics, but they will not communicate with each other in that area. There's also been efforts to overcome the split by shaping a third option of people who would be recognized by both sides. Some years ago, I was teaching at Mundelein Seminary of the University of St. Mary of the Lake near Chicago, and we would have 2 students per year from China. This was part of a program approved by the Holy See to try to train the next generation of leaders for priestly ministry in mainland China. And we were told not to ask their status. So we had people from both sides. Just as an example of how this could work, one of our students was ordained by an underground bishop at 5 o'clock in the morning. At 10 o'clock on that same morning, he was given a blessing by the patriotic bishop in a public ceremony in the presence of government officials, and then they had a big banquet. So he was accepted by the underground church because he's ordained by a bishop in full communion with the Bishop of Rome. So it's completely valid and licit. He's also given a blessing by the patriotic bishop in the presence of the government officials. In recent years, a good number of the men who were being appointed bishops were appointed with the approval of the Holy See, as well as of the Chinese government. So at various points, there have been moments when people were hopeful that there would be a breakthrough moment. I mean, I've been hearing various hopes like this since 1988, but it goes back and forth. It's a zigzag journey. One of the most moving narratives here is that of Aloysius Jin Lucian, the late Bishop of Shanghai. He had one of these incredible lives. His first volume of his autobiography has now been translated into English. It goes up to 1982. He was a Jesuit priest, studied in France, traveled around Europe before the revolution. Then after the Chinese Revolution, the government more and more exerted pressure, more and more of the foreign Jesuits left or were in prison, so he got more and more jobs as a fairly junior Jesuit. He was rector of the seminary. 1955, he was arrested. Spent the next 27 years in prison. He had various conditions in prison, so it wasn't all the same. At times it was more harsh. At times he was doing translation work for them. He was reported to the Jesuits in Rome and to the Holy See for being a collaborator because he was doing the translation work. Then in 1982, after 27 years, the government authorities told him he could have his old job back. So at this point, he has to face the discernment question, which is better, to remain in prison or to work with the government and try to prepare the way for the future of the church in China. And one of the Chinese government officials challenged him, look, if you don't work with us, in 20 years the Catholic Church in China will be over, and it'll be your responsibility. He pondered and decided to work with the Chinese authorities. So he was named, again, the rector of the seminary, 27-year hiatus, and then was named the Bishop of Shanghai. First he was auxiliary bishop in 1985, then Bishop of Shanghai in 1989. At this point, this is without the approval of the Holy See, so he's technically in schism. And he is vilified at this point by Catholics in the underground church and by senior figures in the Society of Jesus and in the Holy See. He himself later commented to Anthony Clark, who was interviewing him, quote, "I am both a serpent and a dove. The government thinks I'm too close to the Vatican, and the Vatican thinks I'm too close to the government. I'm a slippery fish, squashed between government control and Vatican demands." What sustained him through his years of imprisonment and through the accusations of betrayal was the confidence expressed in a prayer from Blessed Elizabeth of the Trinity. "Heaven is the Trinity. With the Trinity in my heart, I am as if in heaven." Bishop Jin commented, "Thus I made of jail my heaven, never ceasing to praise the Trinity, forgetting all pains and living replete with joy." As bishop, Jin sponsored the first translation of the documents of Vatican II into Chinese. During the 1990s, he worked on the program that sent seminarians to this country, also to Paris, to Milan, to Germany. So he was trying to get the best possible education for his students. When he came to us at Mundelein, I met with him. He offered an extremely long petition in the Prayer of the Faithful. So technically, at this point, he's still in schism, and so he's not concelebrating with us. But in a sense, he gave a homily under the rubric of this prayer for the unity of the Church and reunification of the Church in China with the Pope. In the 2000s, the Holy See approved him as the coadjutor bishop of Shanghai. This was clear by the early 2005. According to some reports, this was done covertly in 2003. So towards the end of the pontificate of Pope John Paul II, he was recognized. And at this point then, he shared leadership with the underground bishop, Joseph Fan Zhongliang, who eventually ended his life suffering from Alzheimer's disease. But when they were both in their 90s, we have this beautiful image of the two bishops living together in the bishop's house in Shanghai until their deaths. Jin Luxian, born in 1916, died in 2013. Joseph Fan Zhongliang, born in 1918, died March 2014. Joseph Fan Zhongliang was in prison for 30 years. Just staggering to me. 2012, the situation changes. In July, Thaddeus Ma Da-Ching was named the auxiliary bishop of Shanghai, with the approval of both the Holy See and the Chinese government. And so the expectation was he would succeed and be a force of unification. During the ceremony of his ordination, he publicly announced that he was resigning from all the committees of the Catholic Patriotic Association. After the service, he was taken away and is presumably still under house arrest. Last year, when I was at Fudan University in Shanghai, I asked about his situation, and the people around the table, including administrators of Fudan, including a French Jesuit who works there, they did not know what was going to happen on this. It's still, last I've heard, unresolved. Recently, the Chinese government has been more and more appointing men as bishops without consultation with the Holy See. Last fall, the government announced its intention to formulate a Chinese Christian theology appropriate for China. Now, because the government's policy is not always consistent, we don't know where this is all going long term. It's zigzagged before. Some speculate that there's a power struggle within the Chinese government that accounts for the inconsistencies. The Catholic communities in Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan all have normal relations with the Holy See, but they also face the question how to relate to the Chinese government. The two cardinals in Hong Kong give very different examples. Cardinal Zen, the retired Archbishop of Hong Kong, has repeatedly issued blistering attacks on the Chinese government, mocking Chinese government officials for not knowing that the Catholic Church worldwide is governed by and obedient to the Pope. Cardinal Zen has long been a great skeptic of any reconciliation with the Chinese government. Cardinal John Tong Hong, the current Archbishop of Hong Kong, has been much more diplomatic in his public statements. Nearby in Vietnam, conflict with the government has also challenged the Catholic Church. I was there a few years ago with a Vietnamese Jesuit priest who was a doctoral student with us at Georgetown, so we met a few people there. When I was with the Bishop of Bac Ninh in the north near Hanoi, I asked him if he had to fill out reports for the government. He answered me, "What would the point be? They have spies everywhere. They know everything I do and everything I say." So the government is very nervous about Catholics. I was told there are no Catholics in Vietnam today who are in prison simply for being Catholic, but I met priests who had spent time in prison. There have been tensions at times more acerbic than others. There's also a tremendous mood of hope from what I picked up. I was at the Jesuit Theology in Ho Chi Minh City, and it's filled with these young Jesuits. Most of the Jesuits in Vietnam today are under the age of 30. And I was there during their English language month when there were a number of people from the United States coming over as visiting scholars. And so for the meals, we would sit with the students to force them to speak English. Because the idea was their classes were in English, the Mass was in English, so I was able to concelebrate with them. And all the conversation was supposed to be in English for that month so that they'll be able to move internationally. So there's a tremendous mood of hope among the younger people. I lectured at the Institute of Philosophy of the Academy of Social Sciences in Hanoi, the old think tank for the Communist Party. The older philosophers would have been trained in the former East Germany in strict Marxist-Leninist thought. So I walk into the seminar room, and here's Ho Chi Minh looking down on me. I couldn't help but wonder what he would think. Here's a Catholic priest coming to talk about Buddhist-Christian dialogue in the Holy of Holies of Marxist-Leninist thought. One of the senior faculty was still of the older Marxist mindset that religion is simply to be dismissed. But the chair of the session, one of the administrators of the program, said candidly that, quote, "We used to dismiss religion, but now we have a new attitude." And he thanked me for giving their younger faculty a model of how to relate Buddhist and Christian thought. And the younger faculty, one woman was trained in Delhi in Buddhist studies, another had been trained in Taipei. So some of them are getting outside educations, knew fluent English, and were very interested in interreligious dialogue as an interesting and important philosophical question. Another place where there's trouble with the government is Ukraine. A few years ago, I was visiting a scholar at Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. And this is also a church with a tremendous sense of martyrs, like the church in China and Vietnam. I had lunch with a man who had been in a Soviet prison for 10 years for protesting when the Soviet Union didn't follow the Helsinki Accords. Today, he's director of a human rights center at Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. But right now, there are tremendous pressures on the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, especially in Crimea. The Russian Federation does not officially recognize the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. To regularize their situation, the government is pressuring them to recognize the Russian conquest of Crimea. And so they're caught in this bind. And the deadline was just January, so I'm not sure quite where this is right now or where it's going, but it's a tremendously perilous situation. One Ukrainian Greek Catholic priest, Father Bohdan Kostevsky, and some of his parishioners have been imprisoned by, quote, unknown police forces in Crimea, and then was released. And this is against the background of sharp tensions between the Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill, Patriarch of Moscow, and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Patriarch Sviatoslav Shevchuk has done a number of things that Patriarch Kirill doesn't approve of, and so this is a very tense relationship right now. Last week I received a letter from a young woman in Lviv. Her husband had been in a course that I taught there a couple years ago, and I asked her about the situation there, and she described the tremendous discouragement of the Ukrainian government soldiers who do not have proper equipment. From what she says, the reports she and her colleagues are hearing is that the generals and other top officers take a lot of what is sent, and the ordinary soldiers do not get what they need. And so there are reports the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is supplying things like body armor to the Ukrainian government troops in the eastern part of Ukraine and other supplies to support the soldiers. So it's an extremely tense situation. And every day the news seems to go from bad to worse in terms of the fighting over there. A number of the most difficult areas today involve relations with the Muslim community. A few years ago I taught at Georgetown School of Foreign Service in Doha, Qatar, on the Persian Gulf. And I've been to Turkey a number of times speaking for the Istanbul Foundation for Science and Culture. And I've also been to Bethlehem University for a Muslim-Christian dialogue. We know that in the long run of history, there have been many times when Muslims and Christians have been at odds with each other. it's important also to recognize in this long history, there have also been times when Muslims and Christians have lived in peaceful relations. Often there was kind of a working agreement of one side treating the other as a subaltern community with various restrictions, but nonetheless protected. So it's not equality, but it's a subordinate group, and they usually do not think in terms of individual human rights, but more the prerogatives of a community. And so it's a very different way of thinking in Middle Eastern history than much of what we think of coming out of modern Western European experience. In principle, neither Christian nor Muslim rulers were supposed to use force to convert people. Nonetheless, at times, this was violated by leaders on both sides. Today, as you know, the current situation of Christians in areas like Iraq and Syria is difficult, even desperate. And so often in areas where they did live together for thousands of years, because these are some of the oldest Christian communities that we have, there are now persecutions driving many Christians to flee. And we face the very serious danger that, especially in some areas of the Middle East, Christians are leaving and may never return in the foreseeable future. But it's still important not to project a monolithic, hostile identity onto Muslims. There's over 1 billion Muslims in the world. They often disagree sharply with the violence that is being done today against Christians and other minorities. Some blame the religion of Islam itself for the conflicts. Recently, Fr Chase, a news reporter and advisor to American military authorities, has argued persuasively that in many cases, the primary cause of the conflict is the pervasive corruption of the government and society. Militant religious movements in such contexts often appear to offer a hope of an uncorrupted alternative and gain popularity for a time. And she draws from many different examples. This corroborates much of what I had heard when I was on sabbatical some years ago when I was in Ukraine, India, and China. In different contexts, I kept hearing about corruption as this pervasive curse. Recently in Nigeria, where Boko Haram has caused so much harm, Bishop Oliver Dashadoma from Maiduguri, up in the north where there's been fighting in recent days, has also stressed the role of corruption in poisoning relationships. He says, I quote, "If we stamp out corruption in our country, we can win this war too. We are scared, as all human beings are, but our faith cannot be overcome by terror. This is our land, and we are staying put." And then he goes on, first of all, he says, however, the corrupt and the infiltrators who collaborate with Boko Haram's militia, even from within the regular army, must be done away with. But then he notes on the other side of this, quote, "On December 26th, many Muslims came to my home. We celebrated by eating and drinking together." And he notes many Muslims in Nigeria go to fight with the army against the extremists. Similarly, in the Central African Republic, there's been bitter fighting between Christians and Muslims. There's a group of 3 leaders, Reverend Nicholas Gorokoyame Gangu, Imam Omar Kabina Layama, and Archbishop Dieudonné Nazapailanga, also stress that this should not be seen as primarily a conflict between Muslims and Christians as such, but rather as political. And again, the frustration that they're fighting over often comes from corruption. The Archbishop comments, quote, "The Seleka, the rebels, rose up because they were claiming that their region had been abandoned, that they had no say in the government, that their resources or diamonds were being stolen, that they were the victims of lack of attention from the government." In Iraq, in particular, the situation is heartrending. The estimates are that in 2006, there may have been 1.6 to 1.8 million Christians in Iraq. Today, estimates are there's about 400,000. Now, this is also a tremendously painful issue for the Chaldean Catholic community. The patriarchs of Iraq have issued a number of statements calling for international aid. Many of the leaders of the Chaldean Catholic Church have fled from Iraq for fear. They're afraid they're going to be killed. And there's currently a major conflict. The patriarch of the Chaldean Church, Louis Raphael Sacco, has ordered some of these Chaldean Catholic priests to return. They've refused. Some of them are in California, where Bishop Sarhad Jamo, the Chaldean Bishop of San Diego, has welcomed them and given them his blessing for staying there. One priest stated openly that for him to return would be committing suicide. So Patriarch Sacco is in bitter conflict with Bishop Jamo, calling for his resignation, and has called an extraordinary synod to meet in Baghdad starting February 7th, so just a few days from now. So this is a very difficult situation. In Syria, one of the most heroic witnesses was Frans van der Lugt, a Dutch Jesuit priest and psychotherapist who was in Homs, Syria for many, many years. He was famous for his masir. This was his march. He would do an 8-day walk, kind of a pilgrimage, in different areas all over Syria. And in earlier times, when it was more peaceful, he would invite Muslims and Christians to join with him together. He knew his life was in danger. He could have gone back to the Netherlands. He resolutely stayed with his people during the siege of 20 months at the risk of his life. And then last April 7th, just a few days before his 76th birthday, he was killed. So he is one of the most moving witnesses of recent years in Syria. I'll close by moving to India, where there's multiple challenges. There's corruption. This contributed to the defeat of the Congress Party in the last national elections and the victory of BJP, the Hindu Nationalist Party, in the last elections, bringing Narendra Modi into office. My Indian Jesuit friends go different ways on him. Some do not trust him at all. They see him as having blood on his hands. He was chief minister in the state of Gujarat about 12 years ago when some Hindus were killed on a train. Then there were riots and over 1,000 Muslims were killed. At the least, he's accused of having kind of stood back from having government forces protect the Muslims during the riots. At worst, he's accused of having actively fomented violence against them. I've talked to other Indian Catholics, another Indian Catholic priest who said he wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now that he's in office, there's the old principle, if you want to change someone's attitude, give the person responsibility. And so there's a hope that maybe things will shift. So far, he has not spoken out against the attacks on churches in India. So there's a lot of concern right now. St. Sebastian's Church in East Delhi was burned very badly from arson, and Catholics saw this as an act of terrorism against them. Often the government authorities don't really investigate properly, and they don't prosecute anyone. Then in this morning's news, early this morning, vandals attacked a Catholic church in South Delhi. This is St. Alphonsus Church in the Basant Kunj area. They entered the sacristy, they broke open the tabernacle and scattered the hosts. So this comes 5 days before the state assembly elections in the nation's capital. So these are, again, very worrying attacks. There's a background on this. About 7 years ago, there was worse violence in the Kaundamal district in the state of Orissa, where a Hindu leader had been killed. The Maoist guerrillas actually even took credit for it, but Hindu nationalists blamed Christians. And there was kind of a pogrom. There were numerous people killed. Some were burned to death. About 50,000 Christians were forced out of their homes. And this is still completely unresolved in the sense that there hasn't been adequate criminal justice investigations. The one priest who went to the police was told by the police, he told his whole story, and they said, "Oh, you're just giving narration. That's not evidence." And then they wouldn't investigate. So there's tremendous frustrations in many parts of India today. I want to stress here, too, as with the Muslims, it's important not to overgeneralize. There's a huge number of Hindus who are very, very favorably oriented towards Catholics and towards Catholic saints and towards Jesus. When I was in Chennai some years ago, I visited a church dedicated to Mary that is a shrine to St. Anthony of Padua, and he's revered there. There's been different accounts of healings through his intercession. So on an average Tuesday night, they get 10,000 people. And these are not all Catholics. These are Hindus and Muslims coming together. On the first Tuesday of the month, it's 15,000. When I was in Bombay, there's a hill overlooking the sea where there's a church that has another revered statue of Mary. And again, huge numbers of Hindus and Muslims come as well to this Catholic church to pray to Mary for healing. So there are many, many places in which Hindus, Muslims, and Christians get along very well. But there's also these troubling issues of the Hindu nationalists. The issues of caste are unresolved. This again depends on where you are in India. A large percentage of the Catholics in India are either from the Dalit, formerly the pariahs or untouchables community, or they're from the Adivasi, the Aboriginal communities. And I stayed for a time among the Warli in the northern part of the state of Maharashtra. It's one of the most moving experiences. These are people coming from the most primitive village life fast forward into the future, with children often being the first in the history of their family to be taught to read and write in the Catholic schools that I visited there. There's still tremendous pain over the situation of Dalits and Adivasis, and this is true even within the Catholic Church, also within the Muslim community. In principle, Christians and Muslims should not care about caste, but all too often there is discrimination within the church, even within religious orders, I've heard from one Indian Jesuit. There's bitter accusations of forced conversion. Often Hindus charge that Christians have used techniques to force or bribe members from these communities to become Christian, and now they're doing kind of a turnabout, so some Hindu nationalists are trying to pressure Dalit Christians to become Hindu again. So again, it's a very, very difficult situation. So what does Christian witness look like in impossible situations? I'd like to close with just two examples. One, a French Trappist priest who was killed in Algeria. The other, a 10-year-old Dalit Christian girl whose home was destroyed in India. One of the most powerful expressions of Christian witness in a difficult situation comes from Dom Christian de Chergé. He was the prior of the Trappist monastery at Atlas in Algeria. But to understand what happened at the end of his life, we have to go back earlier when he was a seminarian from 1959 to 1961. He served in the French specialized administrative sections in Algeria. So this is an uneasy time. The French are still there. One day, there was a skirmish. He had come to know a village policeman named Mohammed, and in this skirmish, Mohammed, the policeman, saved de Chergé's life. The following day, Mohammed was murdered, presumably because he had helped this Frenchman. Mohammed's gift of himself for de Chergé recalled Jesus Christ's gift of his life. And so he kind of read these two in relationship to each other, reflecting on the one hand about the Eucharist, but also about this Muslim who gave his life. In the blood of this friend, he writes, I came to know that my call to follow Christ would have to be lived out sooner or later in the very country in which I received the token of the greatest love of all. So in the aftermath, Sebastian reflected on this gift that he had received in terms that applied to Jesus Christ, but also to Muhammad. He loved me to the end of me, to the end of him. He loved me as I do not know how to love. This simplicity, this self-forgetting, this humble service without self-gratification, without any self-regard. De Chergé meditated on the Quran in Arabic, reflecting on it using the monastic practice of Lectio Divina, a quiet contemplative reading, and found that for both Muslims and Christians, Scripture offers food for the journey. After Dom Christian and his confreres in the monastery in Algeria knew that their lives were in danger, he wrote a final testament which he sent to his brother in France in a sealed envelope to be opened in the event of his death. It was opened on Pentecost Sunday in the year 1996. In it, he faces an adieu, a possible farewell in the event of his becoming a victim of terrorism, addresses his community and church and family, recalling that, quote, the one master of all life was not a stranger to this brutal departure. The mercy of God shapes his perspective to the end. He states that if he has to undergo a violent death, he hopes, quote, to have a moment of spiritual clarity, which would allow me to beg forgiveness of God and of my fellow human beings, and at the same time forgive with all my heart the one who will strike me down. He closes the testament by addressing his prospective killer, alluding to the repentant thief who finds forgiveness on the cross. I quote, "And also you, my last-minute friend, who would not have known what you were doing. Yes, I want this thank you and this adieu to be for you, too. Because in God's face I see yours. May we meet again as happy thieves in paradise, if it please God, the Father of us both. Amen. Inshallah." I'd like to close with the witness and vision of hope of a 10-year-old girl in India, Namrata Nayak. She's a Dalit Christian in Sahi Panchayat near Vaikia. This is in, again, the district of Kandhamal in the state of Orissa. So it'd be like southeast from Calcutta, or southwest from Calcutta, I mean. She was badly burned by a bomb thrown by Hindu extremists some years ago. When she arrived at the hospital in Berhampur, she had lesions on 40% of her body. But afterwards, she healed. And she reflected on her situation, quote, "My hope is that we can still have a future in Vaikia. We possess nothing, and we could still leave. But in Sahi Panchayat, we have some relatives and our neighbors. If we leave, we will be wanderers. Christmas brings hope. Hope is our only treasure now. We were poor, and now even the little we had has been destroyed. But Christmas means that Christ is born, and every birth means a new life. Jesus came down from heaven to save us from this misery, from the pain, from abandonment, from our homelessness. His power fills us with hope, love, and forgiveness." Thank you.